Solitude, Self-Focus, and God Realization by Paramahansa Yogananda. The Power of Seclusion. A gateway to divine contact, Paramahansa Yogananda often emphasized the spiritual necessity of seclusion, describing it not as loneliness but as sacred solitude. One of his most quoted lines is, "Seclusion is the price of greatness." He taught that the noise and distractions of the world prevent the soul from hearing the inner voice of God. For this reason, he encouraged devotees to spend time regularly in quiet, especially in nature, and to retreat periodically for deeper meditation. Yogananda himself practiced extended seclusion and even established hermitages where disciples could withdraw from worldly distractions. In his own words, "Go into silence, and you shall find the great presence of God within you." He insisted that the more one cuts off external stimuli and interactions, the more clearly one perceives the soul's divine nature. He warned that a person too immersed in constant activity and social engagements will seldom progress spiritually. In silence and solitude, the soul blossoms and God's whisper becomes audible. For the sincere seeker, time alone is not a punishment but a divine blessing. Looking within. The essential work of self-reflection, Yogananda repeatedly taught that true spiritual progress comes only through deep introspection. He said, "Introspection is the mirror in which to see the recesses of your mind." This practice requires turning attention away from others and focusing on our own thoughts, emotions, and actions. According to him, most people are preoccupied with judging or observing others, but this external focus blinds them to their own inner imperfections. He urged disciples to daily examine themselves and correct their faults, saying, "Do not look for faults in others. Look for faults in yourself." Through self-analysis, one recognizes the habits and tendencies that bind the soul to delusion. Yogananda taught that without self-reflection, prayer and meditation often remain superficial. He wrote that true progress begins when one sees one's own ego, restlessness, and attachments, and consciously works to overcome them. This practice of inward turning is not selfishness, rather, it is the first act of divine self-responsibility. For only by knowing the self can one transcend the self and unite with the spirit. The futility of seeking fulfillment through others. Yogananda was clear that reliance on others for happiness is a major cause of suffering. He said, "You have come into this world alone, and you will leave it alone. So why not learn to be alone with God now?" In this he was not promoting cold detachment, but rather urging seekers to develop an inner independence rooted in God. According to him, most people look to others for emotional support, validation, or happiness, but these fleeting relationships rarely provide lasting fulfillment. He warned that dependency on others is a subtle form of spiritual weakness, which prevents the soul from discovering the all-sufficiency of God. He often asked disciples, "Why search for love among mortals when divine love waits within you?" Yogananda taught that true strength comes when the soul turns within and finds completeness in divine communion. When a person is filled with God's presence, they no longer demand affection or attention from others, but can love freely without attachment. The soul that stands alone with God stands in the fullness of joy. God communion requires inner withdrawal. One of the most central teachings of Yogananda was the importance of withdrawing the mind from the senses during meditation. He said, the more you withdraw yourself from the world, the more clearly you will hear the voice of God. This does not mean abandoning responsibilities or becoming a recluse in society, but rather cultivating inwardness amidst outward life. He taught that through techniques like Kriya Yoga, one can gradually detach the life currents from the senses and redirect them toward the inner spine and brain, where spiritual awakening occurs. External distractions, including constant attention to other people's affairs, scatter the life force and hinder concentration. Yogananda emphasized that inner communion requires deep stillness, which can only be developed by reducing worldly attachments. Only in that sacred inward turning can the soul merge in the bliss of divine presence. Spiritual growth is an individual journey. Yogananda was emphatic that no one else can walk your spiritual path for you. While the Guru can guide and bless, the effort must come from the disciple. He said, "You must make the effort. Nobody else can make it for you." Even among fellow devotees or spiritual communities, the inner battle must be faced alone. Yogananda encouraged students not to compare themselves to others or compete spiritually, but to look within and strive daily to improve. He reminded them, "Don't measure yourself by others. Be your own judge." He warned against spiritual pride, gossip, and jealousy, which arise from a focus on others. True growth comes when the disciple sincerely, and often silently, works on themselves before God. Even in group meditation, the inner ascent is an individual one. The divine does not judge us by the praise or attention we receive from others, but by the sincerity and depth of our personal efforts. In the spiritual life, solitude is the soil where divine realization takes root. Embracing divine aloneness as supreme, Yogananda did not consider aloneness a void, but a sacred fullness. He said, "When you are alone with God, you are never alone." The path he offered was not one of isolation from love, but liberation from attachment. He often spoke of the bliss that comes from deep meditation, where the soul merges in oneness with spirit. In those moments, the devotee feels more joy and love than in 1,000 human relationships. Yogananda wrote, "In the temple of silence, in the temple of peace, I will meet thee, I will touch thee, I will love thee." This was his invitation to all seekers, to find in inner aloneness the presence of the infinite. He warned against wasting life in the pursuit of social approval or emotional dependence. Instead, he urged every soul to become a spiritual warrior, diving into the silence to discover the self, and through the self, God. In truth, only when we are alone with God do we realize we are never truly alone.